We're taking 4 weeks to study the life and death of Haman. This is week 3 out of 4. Haman was a Persian official during the 5th century BC, and Haman is the poster child for how to lose it all because of dumb mistakes and deadly errors. And we're studying his life because we want to learn from his mistakes and avoid making those same catastrophic errors ourselves. So far in the story, King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes, had selected Esther as his new queen. Esther's uncle Mordecai learned of a plot to assassinate the king, and he warned the king through Esther. Later, the king promoted Haman to chief of staff, and that was a position filled with perks. He had a lot of wealth, he had a lot of influence, and all the other royal officials had to bow down and pay homage to Haman. There was one guy who refused, and his name was Mordecai, that we've already heard about. So Haman so exaggerated Mordecai's apparent disrespect that he decided to murder Mordecai and commit genocide. He decided to wipe out all of Mordecai's people group. He bribed the king and deceived the king into giving him authority to make those arrangements for that genocidal plan. Mordecai asked his niece, the queen, to approach the king and plead for her people. Queen Esther approached the king, but rather than hastily share her request, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet 2 nights in a row. We're going to pick up the story after the first banquet. After the banquet, the king couldn't sleep, so he asked someone to read to him the official records. Doesn't that sound right? You know, you can't sleep, get a boring book. So he said, hey, come read me the history of my kingdom. Well, the part about Mordecai saving the king's life got read that night, and the king asked what reward was given to Mordecai. Well, upon hearing that no reward or thanks had been given, the king said that, oh my goodness, something has to be done, but he didn't know what would be appreciated by Mordecai, and he wanted some good advice. Well, at that same moment, Haman entered the king's palace to ask for permission to hang Mordecai on the 75-foot high gallows that he had just built. The king asked Haman to enter and to give him some advice. The king asked Haman, what should be done for the man that the king wants to honor? Here we are, Esther Chapter 6, to continue the story. Verse 6. Well, Haman thought to himself, who is it that the king would want to honor more than me? That's a great question, right? Haman told the king, for the man the king wants to honor, have them bring a royal garment that the king himself has worn and a horse that the king himself has ridden, which has a royal crown on his head. And put the garment and the horse under the charge of one of the king's most noble officials, and have them clothe the man the king wants to honor, and parade him on the horse through the city square, and call out before him, this is what will be done for the man the king wants to honor. Wow, that's interesting advice, right? Verse 10. The king told Haman, hurry, do just as you proposed. Take the garment and a horse for Mordecai the Jew who is sitting at the king's gate. Do not leave out anything that you suggested. So Haman took the garment and the horse, and he clothed Mordecai and paraded him through the city square, calling out before him, this is what is to be done for the man the king wants to honor. Oh my goodness, what a twist of fate, right, has just taken place. Verse 12. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried off for home, mournful and with his head covered. Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened. His advisors and his wife Jareth said to him, since Mordecai is Jewish and you have begun to fall before him, you won't overcome him because your downfall is certain. And while they were still speaking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and rushed Haman to the banquet Esther had prepared. Whoa. Things are moving fast now, aren't they? But did you catch what Haman's wife said to him? There were a couple phrases that really jumped out to me. One was that phrase, since Mordecai is Jewish, and then your downfall is certain. See, Haman made the fatal error of taking on the Jews. The Jews, the people that God chose to be his own and to work through. Now, why is this such a fatal error? Well, because God had promised something to the forefather of the Jews. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 3, we catch it. The Lord said to Abram, go from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you'll be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse anyone who treats you with contempt, and all the people on the earth will be blessed through you. Did you catch it there? The reason this was such a fatal error to take on the Jews was because God had promised to bless those who blessed the Jews and curse those who cursed the Jews, and Haman had now done that. As you think back through history, every kingdom that attacked the Jews was eventually destroyed. In this picture, you see me and Mara, and with Mara's sister and her husband. We're standing at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, Germany. It's a beautiful place, very ornate gate with a top on there, just really beautiful. But look at this next picture. This one is an overlay of what that gate looked like at the end of World War II. You notice it's just nothing but rubble as far as the eye can see. That area has just been absolutely decimated by the fighting that's taken place, by Allied bombing. Here's another picture of the Brandenburg Gate from another angle. And again, you just see complete devastation. This happened at the capital, the proud capital of a nation that wrongly answered the Jewish question. God says, I'll bless Abraham, I'll bless you and your children, and I'll bless those who bless you, and I'm going to curse anyone who curses you or treats you with contempt. And you see that happen all throughout history. So here's the deadly error that we want to avoid: attacking God's people. Attacking God's people is a deadly error because of this. God often protects his people, and he always avenges his people. If you hear nothing else, catch that line from me today. God often protects and he always avenges his people. So if you or I make this mistake of attacking God's people, know that you will likely get hurt if God chooses to protect his people against you. In the process of protecting them, you may end up being a casualty. But secondly, you'll certainly get hurt when God avenges his people. And he's promised to do that. You see that in Luke 18. You see it over and over in the book of Revelation. God often protects his people. God always avenges his people. So, quick aside here. I want to ask and answer a question that's kind of related to this. Why is there so much hatred of the Jews? I mean, as you look through history, you see that. As you look at present day, you see it happening again. Why is that? Why is there so much hatred of the Jews? Well, I think there are a few answers. One is humans tend to persecute anyone who's different. This summer I had the privilege of vacationing in the Catskills, and I think we might have been one of the very few vacationers there who was not an Orthodox Jew. And I saw them all around me. They dressed differently. Their hair was different. They wore different things and acted a little different. And they hung together differently. So they were different. And I've just noticed, and you've probably noticed too, the humans tend to persecute anyone who is different. But there's another reason why I think there's so much hatred of the Jews, and that's because Satan hates the people of God and stirs up hatred against them. Because he hates God and he knows he can never destroy God, he tries to destroy the people of God, and he tries to do that through other people. And so he stirs up hatred against the people of God. Well, that's interesting. That's about them. Let's talk about us. Non-Jewish Jesus followers are God's people too. You see in Romans chapter 11 that God has grafted us in. He's adopted us into the family. And so we are God's people too. Therefore, if you are a Jesus follower, there are a few things that are true of you. One, you're different. And there will be people who won't like you simply because you're different. Jesus said these words to his disciples in John 15, verse 19. He said, if you are of the world would love you as its own. However, because you're not of the world, but I have chosen you out of it, the world hates you. The world hates you because you don't belong. You're different. Second, if you're a Jesus follower, Satan hates you and wants to stir up hatred against you. And third, if you're a Jesus follower and persecution comes, God will either protect you or go through it with you. And God will certainly avenge you. If persecution comes to you because you're a Jesus follower, know that God will either protect you or go through it with you, and he will certainly avenge you. All right, in our remaining minutes together, I want to give some practical advice for 4 different groups of individuals. First, some practical advice for those who are the persecutors, for those who are persecuting Jesus' followers. Let me just say it to you very bluntly. My advice to you is this: quit for your sake. Remember Haman. Remember Saul of Tarsus. Remember Hitler. Quit for your sake. As I've already said, God will often protect his people, and you'll get hurt as God is protecting them. God will certainly avenge his people, and you will definitely get hurt then. So quit for your sake. Some practical advice for those who are suffering persecution because of their association with Jesus, for the persecuted. 3 things I would say to you that come straight out of the scriptures. First is intercede. Luke chapter 6, verse 28, Jesus said, "Bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you." And that pray isn't a prayer of like, God, hurt them, destroy them. Actually, that's kind of more Old Testament, New Testament. I think we're encouraged to pray for the salvation of our persecutor, because that person has just made a deadly error. And just like you are in danger, and they are in deep danger. So pray for them, intercede on their behalf. Second, rejoice. Rejoice. You see this in Matthew chapter 5, verses 11 and 12, where at the end of the Beatitudes, Jesus says, rejoice when people persecute you, when they accuse you falsely, when they say all kinds of evil things about you that aren't true. Because of me, rejoice. And it's not that we rejoice because we just love being picked on, or we love being harassed, or we love being lied about, or we love being abused. We're rejoicing because, as that text says, our reward is great in heaven. God is going to make it up to us someday. And we rejoice because we have joined in with a long line of other people who've suffered the same way. In that passage, it talks about the prophets. We are joining in, and we are among that group. In Acts chapter 5, there's a story of where the apostles were told, and actually they were threatened, and said, listen, don't talk about Jesus anymore. And they were told, if you do, we're going to beat the tar out of you. And in verse 41 of Acts chapter 5, the apostles walked out of that meeting, out of that threatening situation, and rejoiced that they had been counted worthy to suffer for the name. In other words, there's a lot of meaning in that, but part of that is they were excited, not because of what happened to them, but they were excited that God said to them, you are worthy to be associated with me. You are worthy to go through what I went through with me. I have a lot of headaches. Today is one of those days I've actually struggled quite a bit with a headache, and you can't tell probably, but I've had to do this message in several takes and break it up and redo parts of it because my head hurts quite a bit. And my headaches are a direct result of being persecuted for the name. A long time ago, there were some individuals who thought it was funny. They thought they were harassing me by calling me Jesus, and they would walk behind me and they would say, let's kill Jesus, loud enough for me to hear, and just try to get under my skin and affect my nerves and stuff like that. And then one day they had an opportunity, and so I suffered some severe blows, some head and neck trauma, and from at their hands. And then 2 weeks later, it happened a second time. And so the headaches that I have today are a result of the head and neck trauma that I suffered back then. And so on a day like today, when my head's aching pretty bad, I don't rejoice because I have a headache. In fact, I pray and ask God to relieve my headache, and sometimes I take medicine for it. I go to the chiropractor to try to deal with the head and neck trauma that I've suffered. So I don't rejoice that I have a headache. I rejoice because I believe that God is going to make it up to me. I rejoice because I believe that Jesus was telling the truth when he said, your reward, Andy, will be great in heaven. I'm going to make this up to you. And I rejoice in the fact that Jesus thinks I'm worthy to be associated with him. Many times in my life, there have been people that have been embarrassed to be around me. And I get it. I'm kind of awkward socially at times. I'm definitely clumsy. I don't have great athletic ability. I'm not the funniest person. I get it. And so there have been people who've not wanted to be associated with me, and I get it. But suffering in a weird kind of way shows that Jesus says, I'm happy to be associated with Andy. Andy is my follower, and I'm happy to be associated with him. And I rejoice in that kind of acceptance from Jesus. There's a third piece of advice for the persecuted, comes straight out of scriptures, and that is this: conquer. Conquer. But not conquer the person, conquer evil with good. Romans chapter 12, verse 19, he says, friends, do not avenge yourselves. Instead, leave room for God's wrath. Boy, that's a strong word, right? God is very angry about what's happened to you. And God will avenge because he is rightly angry about what's been done to you. So he says, friends, don't avenge yourselves. Instead, leave room for God's wrath, because it's written, vengeance belongs to me. I will repay, says the Lord. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. For in so doing, you'll be heaping fiery coals on his head. Verse 21, do not be conquered by evil, but conquer evil with good. Do good, and in so doing, you will conquer evil. Third, some practical advice for Jesus followers, all Jesus followers. I would say consider praying for the Jews and for persecuted Christians. Psalm 122:6, pray for the well-being of Jerusalem. Other translations say it this way, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 1, keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. For your convenience, I've put a list of some prayer requests for persecuted individuals I put it in the handout for this week. You can download it off the website there. And it just has a list of things that make sense to pray based on the scriptures for people who are suffering persecution because they are part of God's family. They are Jesus followers. They are God's people. And finally, I want to just speak to those who are considering leaving New York. I've heard from a few of you, and let me just say, I get it. You're looking at some things that have taken place in our state, and you recognize that, hey, you know what? This state isn't super friendly to those who want to raise their children to know and fear and obey only God. The state is enacting some policies that are not conducive to being able to share your faith or live out your convictions in the workplace. I get it, why some of you are thinking, you know what, I think I'd like to leave this state. I want you to know that as I've tried to study the scriptures, we're allowed to flee when persecution comes. You know, we don't always have to stay and take it. We don't always have to turn the other cheek. If we have the opportunity to flee persecution, we are, I believe, allowed to flee. But I don't think that's the whole story. I would say this as well. If you stay, I want you to know that you're safe. Not safe as in no one will ever take you to court. Not safe as in you won't end up in jail. Not safe as in you won't be accused. But safe in a deeper way. You're safe in this way, that nothing can separate you from the love of God. Remember those words in Romans? What can separate us from the love of God? Absolutely nothing. And in that text, he lists a whole bunch of things, many of which are associated with persecution. None of those things can separate you from the love of God. And if persecution comes, God will either protect you or he'll go through it with you. You will not go through it alone. God himself will be there with you through that. And if that happens, God will certainly avenge you. I hope that's encouraging. Our God is the ultimate avenger. And those who persecute, those who attack the people of God, do so to their own harm. I'm looking forward to seeing you in part 4 when we get to wrap up the story, find out what happens to Haman, what happens to Esther, what happens to Mordecai, and we'll learn one more dumb mistake that we can avoid and set ourselves up for much greater success if we'll avoid that mistake. I'll see you in part 4.